Your driveway sits on common area now, Mr. Vance, so you'll be invoiced $200 a month for the use of it, effective the 1st. That was the voice of Brenda Coyle, president of the Stone Mill Ridge Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing on my own gravel apron in white kitten heels with a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. She had driven her white SUV up my lane to tell me that the strip of ground my late wife and I had poured by hand belonged to her board, and that I would be paying rent on it. What Brenda did not know, what she never once thought to check in the 4 years she had been circling my place, was that I had spent 31 years as a county land surveyor, and that the deed in my filing cabinet described my parcel down to the half-inch, driveway and all, recorded the year Eisenhower was president. So I want you to ask yourself something before I tell you how this went. If a woman in heels handed you an invoice for the ground under your own truck, would you argue with her on the gravel? Or would you go inside and let the paper do the talking? I chose the paper. Let me tell you what was in it. My name is Walter Vance. I am 63 years old. For most of my working life, I walked other people's boundaries for a living, ran a transit and a steel chain across ranch country and subdivisions and timber leases all over this part of the mountains. And I retired 6 years ago to the place my wife Ruth and I bought in 1989. It is 11 acres at the end of a county lane, a log house we added on to twice, a barn, a pasture that runs down to a creek, and a driveway 400 feet long that I cut and graded and poured the lower apron of myself the summer Ruth was pregnant with our son. She's been gone 3 years now. Our granddaughter Hazel lives with me. 15 years old, sharp as a tack, the one who started filming things on her phone before I ever thought to. You learn a few things in 31 years of surveying that stay with you the rest of your life. You learn that the ground keeps its own records, that an iron pin driven in 1953 is still exactly where the man put it if you know how to find it, that a corner does not move just because somebody wishes it would. You learn to trust the numbers over the talk. A landowner will swear up and down that his fence has always marked his line, and then you shoot the corners and find the fence is 8 feet over onto the neighbor. And it does not matter how loud he gets, because the pin in the ground and the call in the deed agree with each other, and they do not agree with him. I spent my career being the man who told people where the truth of the ground actually was. Some of them hated me for it. Most of them came around once they understood I was only the messenger. And the message was written down long before either of us showed up. Ruth and I found this place the way you find the thing you did not know you were looking for. We had been renting in town, saving, driving out on Sundays to look at parcels we could not afford. The realtor almost did not show us this one because the log house needed work and the lane was washed out. We walked it anyway, down past the barn to the creek, and Ruth stood on the bank with the water running over her boots and said, "This is it, Walter. This is where we stop looking." We signed the papers that month. I was 31 years old, and I had a wife who knew her own mind and a parcel of ground I could read like a book. The driveway came later, the summer of 1991, when she was 7 months along and refused to stop helping me, even when I begged her to sit in the shade. She mixed concrete in a wheelbarrow in the heat and laughed at me for fussing. That apron at the bottom of the lane has her work in it. I have never once thought of it as anything but the most valuable 40 feet of ground I own, and not because of any dollar figure. When we bought the place, Stone Mill Ridge did not exist. It was a cattle lease and a stand of lodgepole. The developers came in around 2004, platted 140 lots up the ridge above me, and formed an association to run the roads and the clubhouse, and the little man-made pond they called a lake. My 11 acres sat below all of that, older than the plat, never annexed into it, never subject to its covenants. I knew that the way I knew my own hands, because boundary work was my trade, and I had pulled my own deed and the subdivision plat side by side the first week the bulldozers showed up, just to be sure of where I stood. I filed those copies in a manila folder labeled in Ruth's handwriting. I never imagined I would need them. I kept them anyway. That is the whole habit of my life, in one sentence. For years, the association left me alone. Then Brenda Coyle was elected president, and her husband Dale started buying up the undeveloped lots at the bottom of the ridge, the ones nearest my line. I did not think much of it at first. A neighbor buying dirt is a neighbor buying dirt. The first letter came on a Tuesday in spring, on association letterhead, informing me that my fence along the lane was, in their words, out of compliance with community aesthetic standards and would need to be replaced with approved cedar within 60 days. My fence was 60 feet inside my own property and predated their plat by half a century. I wrote back one sentence. My parcel is not part of your association, and I attached a copy of the recorded plat showing the boundary. I made a copy of my letter, dated it, and put it in the folder. That was incident 1. The thing you learn surveying is that the ground does not lie, and the paper does not lie. Only people lie, and usually to themselves first. Brenda had decided, somewhere in her own head, that everything she could see from the clubhouse deck was hers to manage. I could have driven up there and argued. I did not. I filed. The second letter came 3 weeks later. This one was a fine, $250 for failure to remediate the fence, plus a notice that a lien could be placed against my property if it went unpaid. A lien. On a parcel her association had no recorded interest in whatsoever. I read it twice at the kitchen table, set it down, and drank my coffee until it was cold. Because there is a kind of anger that you have to let pass through you before you can act. Or it does the acting for you. I drove to the county recorder's office that afternoon, not because I was worried, but because I wanted a certified copy of my deed with the raised seal on it. Fresh, in case this went where I was beginning to think it would go. I knew that office well. I had spent half my career walking in and out of it. Pulling plats, recording surveys, arguing easements with title clerks who became friends over 20 years. The clerk who helped me that day was a young man named Tony, not long out of school, who did not know me from my surveying years. He pulled my deed and printed it and pressed the county seal into the corner and made small talk about how dry the spring had been and whether the creeks would run low come August. I told him I thought they would hold. He slid the certified copy across the counter in a stiff envelope and told me to have a good one. He had no idea he had just handed me the document that would end a lawsuit I did not yet know was coming. I drove home with it on the passenger seat and added it to the folder. Incident 2, and the first dollar figure, $250. Hazel asked me at supper why I was not angry. She had seen the envelope on the counter and read enough of it to understand somebody was trying to take money from us. I told her I was angry. That anger was a thing I felt in my back teeth and my forearms. But that angry men sign things they should not sign and say things that end up in other people's files. I told her the trick was to be the one with the file. I told her about a job I had run years before, a fence dispute between 2 ranchers that went on for a decade, and how the one who won was not the one who shouted loudest at the county meetings, but the one who quietly had a survey in his drawer the whole time. She thought about that, pushing peas around her plate, and then she asked if she could start recording when the SUV came down the lane. I said yes. I did not know then how much that yes would matter. The escalations came like spring runoff after that, steady and rising. In June, a man in a polo shirt with a laminated badge clipped to his belt showed up claiming to be conducting a compliance inspection of my outbuildings. He parked a truck with a magnetic sign on the door that read, in part, that he was an inspection service. and the sign was peeling at one corner so that the vinyl curled away from the metal. He walked toward my barn with the clipboard already raised, the way a man walks when he has decided the answer before he asks the question. I came out of the shop wiping my hands on a rag and asked him what authority he inspected under. He said he was contracted by the association. I asked him to show me a county credential, a state license, anything with a seal. He patted his pockets and produced the laminated badge, which had his photograph and a logo and absolutely no issuing authority on it that meant anything. I have seen real inspection credentials my whole working life. This was not one. I told him, level and quiet, that he was standing on private land with no jurisdiction over it and that he needed to go. He looked back up the lane toward the ridge, as if Brenda might be watching, and then he got in his truck and went. Hazel got all of it on her phone from the porch, the badge that was not a badge, the truck with the magnetic sign that peeled at the corner, the whole sorry performance. Incident 3. In August, a customer of mine, a rancher named Earl who paid me to run a fence line on his spread 2 valleys over, called me up sounding rattled. I had known Earl 20 years. He was not a man who rattled easily. He said a woman had phoned him out of nowhere, claiming I was operating an unlicensed business out of a residential community, and that he should think twice about associating with me, that there could be liability in it. Earl said, "Walt, who is this woman, and why does she have my number?" I told him her name and her title and her husband's 6 lots. And Earl was quiet a second, and then he laughed. The dry laugh of a man who has been ranching long enough to recognize a shakedown when he hears one. He said, "I have hired you for 20 years, and I will hire you 20 more. And you tell that woman to call me again so I can give her a piece of my mind." That call told me something, though. Brenda had gone through the trouble of finding my old clients, of digging up names and numbers, of trying to choke off the little bit of survey consulting I still did in retirement. Money I mostly turned around and spent on Hazel anyway. This was not about a fence. This was about pressure, applied wherever she thought I was soft. Incident 4, and I wrote down Earl's account word for word and had him sign the bottom of the page the next time I saw him at the feed store. The first affidavit in what would become a stack of them. By then, I had started to understand the shape of it. Dale Coyle owned 6 of the lots between the bottom of the ridge and my northern boundary. Those lots were landlocked. The only sensible road access to them ran straight across the lower end of my parcel, along the same line as my driveway. If Dale wanted to develop those lots, and a man does not buy 6 lots to look at them, he needed my ground, or at least an easement across it. And his wife, the president of the association, had decided the cheapest way to get it was to convince me, and eventually a court, that my driveway was common area she controlled. That was the shape of it. Every fine, every notice, every visit was a brick in a wall, meant to wall off my own road and hand it to her husband. And I could see the whole structure of it now, even if I could not yet prove it. I want to step out of the story for one moment, the way I promised. If this is happening to you right now, do not pay the first invoice. Do not pay it to keep the peace. A single payment is evidence, and it is evidence against you. Write down the date, photograph the notice, and go pull your deed. Then come back and watch how this ends, because the ending is the whole point. The invoice I opened this telling with came in October, a year and a half into it. $200 a month. Rent on my own driveway, effective the 1st. Brenda hand-delivered it because she wanted to see my face. She drove the white SUV down the lane and parked it crooked across the bottom of my own driveway, on the very apron Ruth had poured, and got out in the white kitten heels that sank into the gravel with every step. She held the clipboard against her chest and read me the relevant line as if I could not read it myself. Your driveway sits on common area now, Mr. Vance, she said. So you will be invoiced $200 a month for the use of it, effective the 1st. I looked at the paper. I looked at the heels sunk in my gravel. I thought about 13 different things I could have said, and I said none of them. I said thank you, took the invoice, and turned to go inside. That was when she made her mistake, the one she made on camera. Behind me, I heard her tell Hazel, who was filming from the steps, that she should put that phone away because recording an HOA officer on association business was a violation and that she could be reported for it. Hazel did not put the phone away. Hazel said, calm as her grandmother ever was, "This is my grandpa's driveway, and I can record on it." Brenda told her again to stop. Hazel kept filming. I stood in the doorway and let it happen, because my granddaughter was standing on her own grandfather's land, and she knew it down to the soles of her feet. And there was nothing that woman could do about it. That was the second time Brenda Coyle said something on camera she would later wish she had not. The first was the rent itself. The invoice was not an insult, and it was a foundation. If I paid it even once, I would be admitting their claim to the strip. That was the trap, and it was a good one, and it would have worked on a man who did not keep paper. That winter, the association filed suit. They sued me in district court for unpaid fines and unpaid driveway rent, a sum that with their penalties and interest had ballooned to just over $11,000. And they asked the court to declare the lower portion of my parcel common area subject to their covenants. 11,000 and change. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with the complaint and feeling something close to calm. Because a lawsuit is a thing that happens in front of a judge, with rules, with evidence. And evidence was the one fight I had been preparing for my whole life without knowing it. I hired a lawyer named Susan Park, practical, unflappable, a woman who had handled property disputes in this county for 20 years. We sat in her office, a small one over the hardware store with survey plats framed on the walls, which I took as a good sign. The first thing she asked me was whether my deed meets and bounds closed cleanly, and whether the driveway fell inside them. I told her I had run the calc myself the week we moved in. She set down her pen and asked me what I had done for a living. I told her. She sat back in her chair and was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me to run it again, fresh, in front of her, on the actual ground, so that there would be no question. So I did. The next morning, I set up my old transit on the actual ground, the same instrument I had carried for 31 years, and I shot the corners off the original monuments that were still in place, the iron pins my predecessor's surveyor had driven in 1953. I found the southeast pin under a clump of bunch grass, exactly where the deed said it would be. The top of it worn smooth and rusted but solid in the dirt. Hazel held the rod for me, the way I had taught her, steady and plumb, while Susan watched from the tailgate of her truck with a thermos of coffee. I closed the traverse with an error of less than 1/10 of a foot over 11 acres. The driveway, every inch of it, including the apron Ruth and I had poured, sat 61 feet inside my recorded south line. Susan looked at the numbers on my field book, and then she looked at me, and she said, "In that case, they have sued a surveyor over his own boundary, and they do not know it yet." I told her they had never once asked what I did for a living. She said that was going to cost them, and she said it the way a person says a thing they are quietly looking forward to. The day and time stamp I remember best is a Thursday morning in February. Frost still on the pasture. When Brenda came down the lane with 2 men I did not recognize and a flatbed trailer. The men had post hole equipment and a roll of chain link. They intended to fence off the lower 40 feet of my driveway, the disputed strip, to physically establish the association's claim while the lawsuit was pending. They had no court order. They had Brenda's certainty, which she mistook for authority. I came down off the porch with my coffee still in my hand and my phone already recording in the other. And Hazel came down behind me with hers. And the dog, Pete, trotted down ahead of all of us with the loose, easy gait of an old healer who thinks every arrival is for him. I told the men, calmly, that they were about to dig post holes on private property, that there was no court order permitting it, and that they were being filmed doing it. The bigger of the two stopped with the auger half off the trailer. He looked at the chain link, and he looked at me, and he looked at Brenda, the way a working man looks at the person who is supposed to know whether a job is legal. He said, "Brenda, is this his land or is it not?" And Brenda said, loud and clear, on Hazel's video, that the strip was functionally part of the association's jurisdiction and that they should proceed. There was that word again. The man set the auger down anyway. Slow, because a man who digs for a living can smell a lawsuit coming the same way I can smell rain. That was the third time Brenda voiced it. And it was the one that mattered. Because digging those holes was no longer a paperwork dispute. It was destruction of property and trespass. And now there was video of the president of the association ordering it onto land that was not hers. I called the sheriff's office from where I stood. A deputy named Ramirez came out within the half hour, no lights, just a tan cruiser easing down the lane. He was young, careful, and he did exactly what a good officer does, which is decline to take sides on the gravel. He listened to Brenda for a minute, and he listened to me for a minute, and he looked at the roll of chain link and the auger and the lawsuit paperwork Brenda waved at him. He told everyone, plainly, that he could not adjudicate a property line in the field, that a civil claim had been filed and was pending, and that both parties had a right to their day in court. He told Brenda's men to stop any digging until the matter was resolved, which they had already done the moment a uniform arrived. Brenda did not like that. She told the deputy that as a sworn officer, he was obligated to enforce the association's authority. Ramirez told her, evenly, that he was obligated to keep the peace and that nobody was going to be putting posts in contested ground today. Then he came over to me and said something quietly, off to the side, that I have repeated to a lot of people since. He said, "If you have got documentation, build the pattern, every incident, every date, every recording." He said one clean record beats 10 loud arguments, and that when the facts finally land, they land hard. I told him I had 18 months of it in a folder with my wife's handwriting on the tab. He nodded like a man who had seen too many people show up to a fight like this with nothing in their hands. He wrote it up before he left. I added Incident 6 to the folder that night, after Hazel was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table the way I had sat at it for every entry. Trespass and attempted destruction of property, witnessed, recorded, with a sheriff's report number attached. The lawsuit ground forward through the spring. Susan deposed Brenda in April. I was not in the room, but I read the transcript afterward, every page of it, and I will tell you that a person who has never been made to answer a precise question under oath does not enjoy the experience. Susan asked her simply what document the association relied on to establish that my driveway was common area. Brenda said the plat. Susan asked her to point to the line on the plat where my parcel was included in the association's boundary. The transcript shows a long pause there, the kind the court reporter marks, and then Brenda said she would have to consult the board's records. Susan asked whether anyone on the board had ever reviewed my recorded deed before issuing a single fine. Brenda said the deed was not relevant because the area was functionally common. There was that word again, functionally, the word people use when the actual facts will not cooperate. Susan asked her how many times the association had inspected, fined, or invoiced my property. Brenda did not have a number. Susan did. Susan entered my certified deed and the original 1953 plat into the record that afternoon, and she entered the count of incidents alongside them. The trap was set, and Brenda had walked into it with her eyes open and her chin up, still certain, even then, that wanting a thing badly enough was the same as having a right to it. I learned the real motive in May, and it came from inside their own camp. A woman named Carol, who had served on the association board for 2 years and had voted, to her later shame, for some of the early fines, asked to meet me at the diner in town. I almost did not go. I did not know her except as a name on the bottom of letters that had cost me money. Susan, though, said go, listen, bring nothing, say little. So I went, and I sat in a back booth, and Carol came in looking like a woman who had not slept well in a while. She slid a folder across the table, her own, and she did not say much at first. She told me she had quit the board the week before. Then she told me the rest of it in a low voice, glancing at the door now and then, the way people do when they are saying something they are afraid to say. She told me that Dale Coyle had presented a development plan to the board in a closed session, a plan to build 12 new homes on the 6 landlocked lots, and that the entire project depended on securing road access across the lower end of my parcel. She told me that Brenda had assured the board the access would be obtained through the association's authority over what she called the common driveway, and that the fines and the rent and the lawsuit were all steps toward forcing that access. She told me there was money in it, real money, that the 12 lots represented a profit none of them had been allowed to see the full numbers on. Carol said the thing that stayed with me. She said, I believed you were a difficult old man flouting the rules, Mr. Vance, because that is what we were told you were, week after week. Then I went to the county office on my own, and I pulled the plat, the real one, and I laid it next to the description of your land. And I saw that your parcel was never part of this association at all. She said she had sat in her car in the county parking lot and felt sick, because she had understood in that moment that she had spent 2 years helping a married couple try to take a man's road for their own profit, and dressing it up as community standards while they did it. She signed an affidavit right there at the diner table, and I watched her hands shake while she did it. And I did not say I told you so, because there was no satisfaction in it, only a woman doing a hard right thing late. Earl's account, the deputy's report, Hazel's videos, Carol's affidavit. The folder was getting heavy. The trial was set for a Wednesday in late June. The county courthouse is a square brick building with a flag out front and a courtroom that smells like old varnish and floor wax. I wore the one good jacket I own. Hazel sat in the second row in a clean blue shirt with her hands folded. Susan had the folder. Brenda sat at the plaintiff's table beside the association's lawyer, a tired-looking man from the city who I do not think had been told the whole story. And Dale Coyle sat behind her in a sport coat, checking his phone. Brenda wore the magenta blazer and the pearls and the pushed-up sunglasses on the crown of her head, even indoors. She looked, in that varnished room, exactly as out of place as she had looked on my gravel. The association put on its case first. Their lawyer argued that the driveway had been used by association members and guests for years, that it functioned as a shared access, and that the protagonist, meaning me, had refused reasonable community oversight. He used the word functionally more than once, and I watched the judge, a woman named Eleanor Briggs, with reading glasses and a flat, patient manner, make a small note each time he said it. He called Brenda to testify, and she sat up there and described me as a man who held himself above the standards of the community, who would not so much as replace a fence for the good of his neighbors. She said the word jurisdiction, the way some people say a prayer, as if repetition made it true. I sat with my hands folded and my field book closed on the table in front of me, and I let her talk. Hazel, in the second row, did not move. She had been raised on a porch watching me not take the bait, and she did not take it either. When it was Susan's turn, she did not give a speech. She did almost the opposite of a speech. She stood, and she said the dispute came down to one line on the ground and one line on paper, and that she would let the document speak. She asked to approach, and she laid 2 documents on the clerk's table in front of the judge. The first was the certified copy of my deed, recorded in 1953, with the raised county seal that Tony had pressed into the corner. The second was the original subdivision plat the association itself had recorded in 2004, the one Brenda had pointed to in her deposition and could not read. Then she asked the judge to read the legal description of my parcel into the record, the metes and bounds, because, she said, the entire dispute turned on a single line, and she wanted the line spoken aloud in open court. Judge Briggs put on her reading glasses. She read it. She read the bearings and the distances. The call from the iron pin at the southeast corner running west along the section line. The call back north. The closure. And then she read the recorded measurement of the south boundary. And she set my deed beside the association's own plat. And she read the association's own recorded boundary line. And the courtroom got very quiet, because anyone with a ruler could see that the 2 lines did not touch. There were 61 feet between the association's southernmost platted boundary and the top of my driveway apron. My driveway was not on the edge of their land. It was nowhere near their land. It had never been within 1,000 feet of their jurisdiction. The county had read my deed aloud, and the deed described my own ground, and the description ended the case in the time it took to read it. The judge took off her glasses. She looked at the association's lawyer and asked him to direct her to any recorded instrument, any easement, any deed, any plat amendment, granting the association any interest whatsoever in the parcel described in the document she had just read. He shuffled his papers. He had nothing, because nothing existed. She asked Brenda directly whether the association had ever recorded such an instrument. Brenda started to say that the driveway was functionally common area, and Judge Briggs stopped her with one raised hand and said, "I have read the deed, Mrs. Coyle. The ground is described in it. The word you keep using is not in the document." Then she was quiet for a long moment, and nobody in that courtroom breathed. And the only sound was the old radiator ticking against the wall. I thought about Ruth pouring concrete in the summer heat with our son riding low in her belly. And I thought about the iron pin under the bunch grass that had not moved since 1953. And I kept my hands still on my knees and my eyes on the judge. And I waited the way I had learned to wait across 31 years of letting the ground tell the truth in its own time. Judge Briggs ruled from the bench. She dismissed the association's claim in its entirety. She found that the parcel had never been part of the association, that every fine, every lien threat, and the driveway rent had been issued without any legal basis, and that the attempt to fence the strip during pending litigation had been a trespass. She voided the $11,000 in claimed fines and rent down to zero collected, against a recorded deed 71 years old. Those were the 2 numbers that sat side by side in the air of that room. $11,000 demanded, 0 owed. A deed recorded in 1953, a claim that died in 2024. It did not end with the dismissal, because Brenda's overreach had built its own consequence, the way these things do. Susan had filed a counterclaim, and Carol's affidavit and the deposition transcript and Hazel's videos were all in front of the court. The judge referred the matter of the fraudulent rent invoices and the attempted forced access to the county attorney. And a referral from a sitting judge is not a thing that simply evaporates. Within 2 months, the development plan was dead because the 12 houses had never had legal road access and never could without my consent, which Dale Coyle was never going to get now, not after what his wife had done on my gravel. The 6 landlocked lots Dale had bought as an investment sat exactly as landlocked as the day he bought them. His money frozen in dirt he could not reach and could not sell to anyone who pulled the same plat I had. Brenda resigned the presidency before the association could vote her out. The membership had finally read the same plat the rest of us had, passed hand to hand at a packed meeting Carol later described to me. And they did not care to keep paying legal bills for a fight she had started by never once checking the deed. Some of the same neighbors who had looked at me sideways for 2 years made a point of waving now when they passed the lane. The thing Brenda tried to take, the road across my land, was the exact thing her husband lost. And they lost it because she had reached for it without looking. The consequence was not something I did to her. It was something she did to herself, slowly over 18 months, while I sat at my kitchen table and wrote the dates down. The Thursday after the ruling, Hazel and I walked down the lane in the evening to the bottom apron of the driveway, the part Ruth and I had poured. There is a place near the edge where, the summer we finished it, Ruth had pressed her hand flat into the wet concrete, and then thought better of leaving a print and smoothed most of it away, so that all that remains is a faint, shallow curve you would only find if you knew to look. Hazel knew to look. She crouched and put her own hand over the ghost of her grandmother's, the way she has done since she was small, and she said, "This was always ours, wasn't it?" And I said it was. It always was. The paper just said so out loud. We stood there a while and did not say much, because there was not much that needed saying. The frost was gone. The creek was loud with runoff, fuller than it had been in years. The light went long and gold across the pasture the way it does in early summer. The dog, an old blue heeler named Pete, lay down across the warm concrete like he owned it, which, in every way that matters, he did. So here is the lesson, plain as I can say it. Because somebody listening to this is in the early part of their own version and needs to hear it. Your deed is the strongest thing you own, stronger than any officer in a blazer, stronger than any board that has voted itself authority over ground it never bought. Go to your county recorder and pull a certified copy of your deed with the seal on it. Read the legal description and walk it against the actual ground, corner to corner, so you know where your line truly runs. If anyone hands you a fine or an invoice for property that is yours, do not pay it, because payment is the admission they need. Keep a folder. Date everything. Photograph every notice, record every visit. Get the accounts of your neighbors in writing while the memory is fresh. Note the day and the time on every entry, because a pattern with dates on it is a thing a court can hold in its hand, and a vague complaint is not. The law is slow, and it is not always fair in the moment. But a clean recorded deed and a patient file beat a loud voice and a clipboard every single time the facts are finally read aloud. If you have got a story like this, a board or an office that reached for something that was never theirs, put it in the comments. Because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who are right in the middle of their own fight and need to know how it came out. Subscribe if you want the next one. Next time, I will tell you about the widow 2 counties over whose association tried to charge her for the rainwater running off her own roof, and the 100-year-old water decree her husband left in a safe deposit box that turned the whole thing on its head. Until then, pull your deed, walk your line, and keep your folder close.